This video is a walkthrough of the distributed condition monitoring example for wind turbines. Let's start by taking a look at the hardware we'll be using. A compact Rio controller, in this case the NI Compact Rio 9074, and the NI 9234 Dynamic Signal Acquisition Module. In addition, we'll be using the DSA demo box to simulate signals coming from a wind turbine. Now that we've gone over the hardware, let's go over the connections that we'll need to make. First, we'll have to provide power to the NI Compact Rio, and we'll do that using the NI 9978 power connector. We'll just plug that in here to the power slots and screw them in to make sure it doesn't fall out. And we'll also have to provide a network connection using just a standard Ethernet cable plugged into Ethernet port number 1. Finally, we'll take our NI 9234 and plug that in to slot 1 in the chassis. Now that we have power to our NI Compact Rio 9074, let's hook the connections up coming out of the DSA demo box. We have an X acceleration, a Y acceleration, and a tachometer on a fan that's spinning inside of the box. So we'll just hook these up to channels 0, 1, and 2.
Now that we have the hardware set up, let's go ahead and take a look at the software we're going to be using. So we'll open up Measurement and Automation Explorer first and make sure that the Compact Rio that we just configured is showing up under Remote Systems. And you can see right here it is. And we're going to note the IP address too because we're going to be using that later. So we'll go ahead and open up the project file. So I just have that in Documents under WinLogger. And we'll open up the LabVIEW project. So you can see over here we have the LabVIEW project, and we can see the Compact Rio that's by default in there. And you'll notice that we have a different IP address than our Compact Rio. So what we're going to need to do is right click, go to Properties, and just change that so they match. So we'll just change that 8 to a 9 and press OK. There are several different VIs in this project. We have our host VIs, which are the ones that are actually going to be running on this host computer, which is going to be monitoring the distributed Compact Rio. We have all the real-time VIs that are going to be running on the Compact Rio real-time controller. We have the chassis, which contains the FPGA target and the FPGA VI. So the first thing we need to do, so we'll go ahead and close this, we'll go ahead and open up the Create Advanced Config XML file. So we want our Compact Rio to be able to run remotely without any supervision. And so what we do is we create an XML file, a startup XML file for it, that gives it all the user information settings that we want. So we have channel info, so what are all the different channels? A tachometer, some accelerometers, some acquisition rates, processing. We have our trigger levels, so in what conditions do we want to acquire a file. Some file config, so where are we saving that on the real-time controller, as well as the collector IP address. So we need to configure both the cRio, which Compact Rio do we want to configure this for, as well as what host computer is going to be doing any monitoring of it. So we'll change this one up here to match the Compact Rio that we did earlier. And we're going to have to find out this computer's IP address. So we'll do Windows R and type in CMD to bring up the command prompt. And we'll type in ipconfig and get this computer's IP address as 10.0.34.142. And we'll just type that in there. And when everything is set up how you'd like it, you go ahead and press Run, and it's going to create that XML file and then FTP it over to the Compact Rio real-time controller. When done with that, we can go ahead and close it. And we'll go ahead and open up the RT05 Main Logger Advanced Deploy, which is the main real-time VI that's going to be running on the real-time controller. We're going to go ahead and set this to run, so it's going to deploy and start running on the real-time controller. And this is something that you would normally set up to run on startup. So as soon as the Compact Rio is turned on, this VI would start running. So we can see the current state of our Compact Rio is in an initialization state. So it's reading that XML file and getting all of its configuration settings ready. And then we move into a check trigger level. So it's going to be checking the trigger conditions that we set in that XML file and seeing if it needs to be acquiring and saving data to file. Down here we can monitor those current levels, so we have the current speed and RMS levels. We can also force a trigger condition. And you'll notice our current state goes into an acquire and save, so it's saving these values now to a file on the actual real-time controller before moving back into a check trigger level condition. We'll minimize that and open up the host 05 combined monitor. This is actually the VI that you would be running on a host computer that's doing any sort of monitoring. We'll go ahead and start that running. And this is actually just a system overview tab. We can see here a configuration tab. So this is very similar to the advanced config VI that we saw earlier, allowing any sort of remote user to change the configuration values without having to exit this VI. So we can see if we look here, all the same tabs that we saw earlier, and then a button to restart the compact Rio with new configuration. We can take a look at the FTP status, and this is monitoring how many files are currently saved on the compact Rio, and then FTPing them off to this local directory here on this computer. So if I increase the RPM speed, we can start a acquisition and save on the compact Rio. And in a moment it should show up here how many files are being saved. You can see 2 files are saved and they're being retrieved off and stored into this directory right here. We also have a live monitor tab, which should provide live monitoring of all of the data. So we have our RPM speed again, as well as some other values. And then we have file playback. So we can take one of those files that we just FTP'd off of the compact Rio controller and play it back. So if I hit select a file, these 2 pop-up dialogues appear. And we'll just select this one right here. And we'll go ahead and select to play all of the channels back. So we can see the frequency spectrum right here of the data of one of the channels. And we can also see a time graph right here. If we want to replay the file, we can just select the replay file button and replay it.
Thank you for watching this brief overview of the distributed condition monitoring example for wind turbines. For more information, please see the attached Developer Zone article.